Shalom, everybody. Shabbat shalom. We are in 2 Samuel, chapter 17, verse 1. Approximately page 334 in the scriptures. And if you have not been keeping up with the story at this point, I strongly recommend you go back channel and get up to speed on the story of David, because there's a lot of moving parts here. We talked about in the previous video, how there's so much going on. There's counterintelligence networks, there's a coup d'etat, there's military action, there's the priesthood involved, there's the ordination of David, there's the bloodline of King Saul, there's infighting amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. There's, Absalom, David's son, trying to overthrow his father. David is ousted from the capital city, Jerusalem, and he's on foot, and there's so much stuff happening. So if you're not up to speed, highly recommended you just take some time and get up to speed. Also recommended you get out your word and read along. And y'all willing, we will do 17 and 18 today and see where that leaves us. They're both relatively reasonable chapters. Bear, I can't believe you smoked that cigar on camera while reading the Bible. Well, with all due respect, Charles Spurgeon, Google it. Also, this is my time that I spend with y'all in service to the Father. I am not perfect, just so we're all on the same page. I am far from perfect, but the imperfections that I have now are but a shadow of the imperfections I had 4 years ago when I came to a fullness of understanding of this word. And those imperfections are but a shadow of the imperfections that I have before I was baptized in the name of Yeshua Messiah. So humans are a work in progress, and I am progressing daily, and I appreciate y'all. 2 Samuel chapter 17. And Ahitophel, remember we named this dude Ahituna because his name is ridiculous in the Hebrew. And Ahitophel said to Absalom, "Please let me choose 12,000 men, and let me arise and pursue David tonight, and come upon him while he is weary and weak." We have this number 12 again. 12 is an interesting recurring number throughout the Bible. You see it in Revelation 7, 12,000 people from each tribe. You see it in the 12 tribes of Israel. You see it in the 12 apostles of Yeshua. It's an all-encompassing number. Is when you see it represented, it's an all-encompassing number. The 12 months in a year, so forth and so on. "Please let me choose 12,000 men, and let me arise and pursue David tonight, and come upon him while he is weary and weak. And I shall make him afraid, and all the people who are with him shall flee. And I shall strike the king alone, and bring back all the people to you. When all return, except the man whom you seek, all the people should be at peace." He's like, I'll take 12,000 guys. We'll go get David right this red hot minute. We'll kill him tonight, and just him, and then I'll bring all the people who are with him back. And the saying pleased Absalom. Sounds good, homie. And all the elders of Israel. But Absalom said, "Now call Hushai the Archite, and let us hear what he says too." Remember, Hushai was sent by David back into the courts of Absalom to nullify, to speak against anything that Ahitophel had to say. And Hushai came to Absalom, and Absalom spoke to him, saying, "Ahitophel has spoken according to this word. Should we do as he says? If not, speak up." And Hushai said to Absalom, "The advice that Ahitophel has given is not good at this time." And Hushai said, "You know your father and his men, that they are mighty men, and they are as bitter as being as a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is a man of battle, and would not spend the night with the people. See, by now he is hidden in some pit, or in some place. And it shall be, when some of them fall at the first, that whoever hears it shall say, There has been a slaughter among the people who are following Absalom. And even he who is brave, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, would utterly melt. For all Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are brave men. But I advise, let all Israel without fail be gathered to you, from Dan to Beersheba, as numerous as the sands by the sea, and that you yourself go to battle. And we shall come upon him in some place where he is found, and fall on him as the dew falls on the ground. And there shall be left of him and all the men with him not even one. And if he withdraws into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we shall pull it into the wadi, into the riverbed, until there is not one small stone found there. So Absalom hears from Ahitophel, hey, I'm going to grab 12,000 guys. We're going to leave right this moment in the middle of the night. We're going to grab up David from amongst his people. Just David, we won't harm the people. And we'll kill him, and then you'll be at peace. Hushai says 12,000 ain't nothing. He says, you know your daddy is a great and mighty warrior, a general who's won countless battles. And everybody in the entirety of Israel knows that your daddy is a mighty war general. You don't want to pick a fight with your dad with 12,000 guys. The men he's got with him, his special forces, they're going to wreck him. Oh, and by the way, the idea that you're just going to go into the camp of the people and pull him out of the camp, he's not with the men of the people. You know that he's hidden. And if we go into the camp, they're going to come out where they're hidden, and they're going to slay the people that Ahitophel, the 12,000 that he has brought. And then word's going to get out to all of Israel that Absalom's army has been destroyed by David. And they'll believe it, because your dad is King David. His reputation precedes him. So if we're going to do this, you need to gather all of Israel, and you go with overwhelming force. And we don't just try and withdraw David from this group of people. We utterly destroy everybody who's with King David. That's, in a paraphrase, that's Hushai's advice. Verse 14, and Absalom and all the men of Israel then said, the advice of Hushai the Archite is better than the advice of Ahitophel. For Yahweh had ordained to nullify the good advice of Ahitophel for the sake of Yahweh bringing evil upon Absalom. Hushai then said to Sadok and to Abiathar, the priests, remember, these are part of the informant network, Ahitophel has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel such and such, but I have advised so and so. So he gives them a report, he says, which they know is going to make its way back to David. And now send hastily and inform David, saying, do not spend this night in the desert plains of the wilderness, but pass over without fail, lest the king and all the people with him be swallowed up. And so the word goes out, regardless of which course of action Absalom takes, whether he goes with the advice of Ahitophel and sends 12,000 dudes right now, or he goes with Hushai and gathers the entire army. Either way, Absalom is on the move. King David needs to gather his people and beat feet. Get out of the AO. And Jonathan and Ahimaaz were stationed at En Rogel, and a female servant, also part of the spy network. They're the runners. And a female servant would come and inform them, and they would go and inform King David, for they could not be seen entering the city. They were known, and so if people saw them coming and going because of their allegiance to King David, they would be spotted as spies, as informants. And so there was this handoff that happened from Hushai, who gathered intel from the court, to Sadok and Abiathar, the priests, who then passed it to their sons, Jehonathan, Jonathan, and Ahimaaz, who were the runners, who then passed it to David. It's interesting, as a side note, the strong oral tradition that the Hebrews, the Israelites, had to have, because it's not like they're writing this down. And so in this game of telephone, they need to make sure that the information that they're passing is clear and concise, and it's not being polluted every time it's handed from person to person to person, which of course is the one of the arguments that's made all the time about the veracity of the Old Testament or the Bible in general, that, well, it was passed down orally for, thousands of years before Noah ever wrote it down, if indeed, and don't even get me started on this, you've got the Deuteronomist, the priestly, then you've got the Yahwist and the Elohist as far as the, yeah, I know I'm probably going over a lot of y'all's heads as far as the composition of the Tanakh, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That it was a collaborative effort. Most scholars, literary scholars, think at this point that it was not simply written down by Moses. But anyway, the point here being that if you have an oral tradition, how do you maintain the accuracy of that oral tradition? And the answer here is, if multiple people know the oral tradition, that if I say something that's inaccurate or I leave something out, there's multiple other people that can call me on it and go, actually, that's not how that went. It's this way. I go, oh, yeah, you're right. And you see that here as well, that you have Hushai passing information to both Sadak and Abiathar. And so if one of them forgets something, the other one will add it in. If one of them misspeaks, the other one will correct. Same thing with Ahimaaz and with Jonathan. If one of them misspeaks, the other will correct. If one of them forgets something, the other will add. Right? You see, so there is some strength in having an oral tradition here, that it's not simply we're at the mercy of men's memories, which we are, but if you're trained up in a culture that has a strong tradition in remembering and speaking clearly, you're good to go. And then you've got the checks and balances of multiple individuals. All right, back to 16. At verse 16, and now send hastily and inform David, saying, do not spend this night in the desert plains of the wilderness, but pass over without fail, lest the king and all the people with him be swallowed up. And Jonathan and Ahimaaz were stationed at En-Rogel, and a female servant would come and inform them, and they would go and inform King David, for they could not be seen entering the city. But a youth saw them and informed Absalom. They got ratted out. So the two of them went away at once and came to a man's house in Bachorim, who had a well in his courtyard, and they went down into it. So they got ratted out. So they go to this dude's house in Bachorim. They climb down in the well. And the woman of the household of this man took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and spread ground grain on it, so the matter was not known. And the servants of Absalom came to the woman at the house and said, where are Ahimaaz and Jonathan? And the woman said, they have passed over the stream of water. And they looked and did not find them and returned to Jerusalem. Now this is like a little, like 1 sentence, 2 sentence thing here. Hey, you know, are Jonathan and Ahimaaz here? Ah, no, bro, they went over the river. Okay, thanks. I imagine it was probably a little bit more intense than that, because Absalom is now, I'm sure he suspected, but he now knows that there are spies within his midst. And so this was probably a very intensive thing. Where is Jonathan and Ahimaaz? Right? But luckily their lives were spared, because this woman covered up the opening of the well with a cloth and with grain, so that it appeared that there was not a hole in the ground the two dudes were standing in. But they bought her excuse. They have passed over the stream of water, and they looked and did not find them, and returned to Jerusalem. And it came to be, after they had left, that they, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, came up out of the well, and went and informed King David, and said to David, arise and pass over the water quickly, for thus Ahitophel has advised against you. And, you know, the battle plan, the course of action from Ahitophel to Absalom. And David and all his people who were with him rose up and passed over the Jordan. And by morning light, not even one remained who had not gone over the Jordan. So they beat feet. By the time the sun come up, they were all across the Jordan. And Ahitophel saw that his advice was not followed. So he saddled his donkey and rose up and went to his house, to his city. So Ahitophel sees that Hushai's word in the court of Absalom has countermanded Ahithophel's word. He's like, I'm not getting anywhere with my counsel to Absalom. So he leaves. He goes home, goes to his city. Then he gave command to his house and hanged himself and died. And he was buried in his father's burial site. And David came to Mitzrayim, and Absalom passed over the Jordan. And David came to Menachem, and Absalom passed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. So they took the course of action of Hushai. Sorry, you may notice me scratching. There are little itty bitty tiny bugs that are flying around They don't bite, they just get into my beard, and I can feel them, because there's, for once in Oklahoma, no wind whatsoever. And it's vaguely driving me crazy. I'll make it. But I'm not over here like all geeked out on meth or something. There's just bugs. They're little itty bitty tiny gnats, and they're driving me half nuts. And David came to Menachim, and Absalom passed over the Jordan, he and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom appointed Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Now remember, Joab was a big part of getting Absalom into power, if I'm remembering correctly. Perhaps I am not. Mephibosheth, Joab, Absalom. Yeah, 14:23. And Joab rose up and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. And the king said, let him return to his own house, do not let him see my face, so forth and so on. Absalom bore 3 sons. 32. And Absalom said to Joab, look, I sent to you saying, come here, so that I send you to the king to say, why have you come from Geshur? And it was good for me while I was there, and now let me see the king's face. And then Joab then went to the king and informed him, and he called for Absalom, and he came to the king and bowed himself on his face to the ground before the king. Then the king kissed Absalom. And so, whether or not Joab and Absalom are in league, Joab brought Absalom back to Jerusalem as he was exiled. And so, perhaps here what we're seeing with Absalom is he doesn't trust Joab, because Joab was David's general. He was his right-hand man when it came to going out and coming in, going to war. And so Absalom, verse 23 of 17, Absalom appointed Amasa over the army instead of Joab. Now Amasa was the son of a man named Yithra, an Israeli, who had gone to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So there's some strange family ties here. And Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead. And it came to be when David had come to Menachim that Shobi, son of Nahash, from Rabbah, of the children of Ammon, and Machir, son of Amiel, from Lo-Debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite, from Rogalim, brought beds, and basins, and earthen vessels, and wheat, and barley, and flour, and roasted grain, and beans, and lentils, and parched vegetables, and honey, and curds, and sheep, and cheese of the herd, for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry, and weary, and thirsty in the wilderness. So here's interesting. We got 3 wise men bringing gifts to the king for provision, protection, and blessing. Interesting. Yeah, another parallel, for sure. Remember that King David is in the line of Yeshua, or vice versa, however one would want to state that, and that a lot of the symbolism that we see in Yeshua harkens back to the household of David. And also, just on the surface, how awesome is it to have good friends? These guys show up and they bring all the things, right? Because remember, David's on foot and he's got people with him. Right now, he's got 2 donkeys. And other than that, they're on foot, like literally barefoot. They don't have much, but they're brought beds and basins to wash with, and earthen vessels to cook in, and wheat and barley and flour and roasted grain and beans and lentils and parched vegetables, and which would be like dried vegetables, and honey and curds and sheep and cheese of the herd, for David and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. And of course, there's again this strong oral tradition of what it's like to be hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness. And so, super cool. It's great to have some resupply, right? We'll do 18. It looks like it's trying to rain. Oh, and I just heard some thunder. 18 is a fairly good stretch of scripture. Let's see if we can get it done. And David mustered the people who were with him and set commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds over them. Much easier to muster your people when they've had a bath and a warm meal. And David sent out 1/3 of the people under the hand of Joab. And so now Joab is with David. Remember, Amasa is now general with Absalom. So David sends out 1/3 of his people under Joab, 1/3 under the hand of Abishai, son of Zeruiah, Joab's brother, and 1/3 under the hand of Ittai the Gittite. And the king said to the people, I shall certainly go out with you too. I'm going to battle, bro. But the people answered, do not go out, for if we flee away, they would not set heart upon us. Even if half of us die, they would not set heart upon us. For now 10,000 are like us. Therefore it is better for you to support us from the city. They're like, if you are with us, they are going to destroy us. But if we have to flee, they'll let us go because you aren't with us. And we got 10,000 guys. We're good. And the king said to them, that which is good in your eyes I do. And the king stood beside the gate, and all the people went out by hundreds and by thousands. And the sovereign, the king, ordered Joab and Abishai and Ittai, saying, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake, who's his son, remember. So the people went out into the field to meet Israel, and the battle was in the forest of Ephraim. And the people of Israel were smitten there before the servants of David. And the slaughter that day was great, 20,000. So David's 10,000 guys killed 20,000 people of all the tribes of Israel in the forest of Ephraim. And the battle was scattered over the face of all the land, and the forest devoured more people that day than the sword devoured. So there were people who were lost. There were people who, succumbed to the fighting in the woods. And when Absalom met with the servants of David, Absalom was riding on a mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great terebinth tree, and his head caught hold in the terebinth, and he was suspended between the heavens and the earth, hanging in midair, while the mule which was under him passed on. And a certain man saw it and informed Joab, and said, look, I saw Absalom hanging in a terebinth tree. And Joab said to the man who informed him, now look, you saw, and why did you not strike him to the earth there? Then I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. If you'd killed this guy, rather than come and tell me he was hanging there, I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. But the man answered Joab, though I were to receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not raise my hand against the son of the king. Because in our hearing the king commanded you, and Abishai, and Ittai, saying, take heed, you who go against the youth, against Absalom. Otherwise I would have been untrue to my own life, for no matter is hidden from the king, and you yourself would have set yourself against me. God's like, I'm not killing Absalom. I heard what King David said, and so did everybody else. That's not worth 1,000 pieces of silver, bro. And Joab said, let me not waste time here with you. And he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through Absalom's heart, while he was still alive in the midst of the terebinth tree. And 10 young men who bore Joab's armor went around and struck Absalom and put him to death. And Joab blew the shofar, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab had held the people back. So they end the battle, and Joab himself throws 3 spears into the heart of Absalom, and then his armor bearers, his squires, kind of his right-hand men, finish Absalom off. By the way, I noticed in one of the recent videos, somebody left a comment to the effect of, hey, there's always a fan on and I can hear it running in the background. This is why. It's to blow these little tiny gnats away from me so they don't try to devour me while I'm trying to read this word with y'all. And it's not currently on because somebody had to make a comment about it. But it's likely to be back so that these gnats will not continue to destroy my shalom while I'm trying to read the word. But I digress. And Joab blew the shofar, and the people returned from pursuing Israel, for Joab had held the people back. And they took Absalom and threw him into a large pit in the forest, and heaped a very large pile of stones over him. And all Israel fled, each one to his tent. So everybody went home. And Absalom in his lifetime had taken and set up a monument for himself, which is in the king's valley. For he said, I have no son to keep my name in remembrance. And he called the monument after his own name, and to this day it is called Absalom's monument. And Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, part of the network of spies, said, "Please let me run and take the news to the king, for Yahweh has avenged him of his enemies." But Joab said to him, "You are not the man to take the news today, but you shall take the news another day. But today you do not take news, because the king's son is dead." So Joab knows that Ahimaaz is in league with David, and Joab says, "You're not the guy sending the message today." Why? Because Ahimaaz is going to give him the truth. Joab's like, "Nope, I'm sending somebody else." And Joab said to the Hushai, "Go, inform the king what you have seen." And the Hushai bowed himself to Joab and ran. And Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said again to Joab, "And whatever it might be, please let me also run after the Hushai." And Joab said, "Why would you run, my son? There is no news to bring you reward." He's like, "What's the point? What do you gain from going?" "And whatever might be," he said, "let me run." So he said to him, "Run." And Ahimaaz ran by the way of the plain and passed the Hushai. So Ahimaaz is like, "Screw it, I'm going. Whatever might be, whatever comes from this, I'm going to go talk to King David." He takes off running, and he runs past the Hushai. Now David was sitting between the two gates, and the watchman went up to the roof over the gate to the wall, and lifted his eyes and looked, and saw a man running alone. So the watchman called out, and he told the king. And the sovereign said, "If he is alone, there is news in his mouth." And he came nearer and nearer. And the watchman saw another man running, and the watchman called out to the gatekeeper and said, "See a man running by himself." And the king said, "This one also is bringing news." And the watchman said, "I see the running of the first is like the running of Ahimaaz, the son of Zadok." And the king said, "This is a good man. He comes with good news." It's interesting here that they had such familiarity with one another that as they see somebody running down the road, they know who it is. Now, David just mounted an army of 10,000 men to go out and take battle against all of Israel, and they're still familiar with the gait, the stride, the familiarity of one individual man. That's something. That's not nothing. David knew his people. And Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, "Peace, don't shoot." Then he bowed down with his face to the earth before the king and said, "Blessed be Yahweh your Elohim, who has surrendered the men who raised their hand against my master the king." And the king said, "Peace to the young man, to Absalom." And Ahimaaz answered, "When Joab sent the sovereign's servant and me your servant, I saw a great crowd, but I did not know why." And the king said, "Turn aside and stand here." And he turned aside and stood still. And see, the Hushite came, and the Hushite said, "Receive news, my master the king, for Yahweh has avenged you this day of all those who rose against you." And the king said to the Hushite, "Peace to the young man, to Absalom." And the Hushite answered, "Let the enemies of my master the king, and all who rise against you for evil, be as that young man is." So the Hushite told him, "Yeah, Absalom's dead." But it's interesting that David told Ahimaaz, "Stand aside, let's see what this guy has to say. Is your witness going to contradict his witness, knowing that the Hushite comes from Joab? Am I about to be fed a piece of misinformation or not?" And the king was shaken, and went up to the room over the gate, and wept. And as he wept, he said this, "O my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. O Absalom, my son, my son." And we won't get into 19 today because it's considerably long. But David now weeps for the loss of his son, even the son who raised his hand against him in violence, who wanted to kill King David to take the throne. And we shall see in the continuing saga of King David what comes next. when we open our Bibles together next week. Bless y'all. Shalom.